Why was cold one of the deadliest threats for medieval peasants, even more than enemies or hunger? When we think of dangers in the Middle Ages, images of battles, famine, or disease usually come to mind. But for the average peasant, especially in Northern Europe, the real enemy was often the bitter cold. Winters were long, dark, and merciless. Temperatures regularly plunged well below freezing, and nights could stretch endlessly, with no central heating, no warm clothes like we have today, and little food to keep energy up. Medieval peasants lived close to the land, relying on crops and animals. When winter arrived, the fields lay bare under snow, and hunting was difficult. Food became scarce, but the cold never took a break. If a peasant caught a chill or couldn't stay warm, it could quickly turn deadly. Hypothermia and frostbite were real risks, and even a small cold could spiral into pneumonia, or worse without proper care. Survival wasn't just about fighting hunger, it was about fighting the cold every single night. Imagine a tiny, drafty hut made from wood and clay, with a dirt floor, maybe a small fire in the middle. The roof leaked, windows were just holes covered with cloth or animal skin. Heat escaped quickly. The only way to survive was through clever preparation and simple, often ingenious, strategies. Winter nights were a test of endurance. If peasants failed to protect themselves, it wasn't just discomfort. They risked death. Their bodies needed warmth to keep going, energy to work the land in spring, and strength to care for their families. One cold night could mean weeks of sickness or the end of a life. So, how did these medieval people stay alive through the coldest nights? What tricks and tools did they use without modern technology? That's the story we're about to explore. From fire making to clothing to how they arranged their homes, the secrets of survival in the harshest times. Stay tuned because the answers might surprise you. You might think medieval peasants just piled firewood in a corner and called it a day. But their winter preparations were much smarter than that. Surviving the cold started long before the first snow fell. Peasants knew that without enough firewood, the night could turn deadly. So cutting and storing wood was a serious business, done with careful planning and hard work during the warmer months. They didn't just grab whatever was nearby. Instead, they selected specific types of wood that burned longer and hotter, like oak or ash, and made sure it was properly dried. Wet or green wood wouldn't keep the fire going and would fill the hut with thick smoke, making the cold nights even harder to bear. But firewood wasn't just tossed into the barn or piled randomly. It was stacked carefully to stay dry through winter rains and snow. Sometimes wood piles were covered with thatch or straw, lifted off the damp ground by wooden pallets or stones. This helped keep the wood ready to burn when temperatures dropped. Food storage was just as critical. Fresh crops were scarce in winter, so peasants relied on preserving what they had. They used simple but effective methods like salting, smoking, drying, and fermenting. Pickled vegetables and salted meats were staples, foods that could last for months without spoiling. Bread was often baked in big batches before winter and dried into hard, dense, twice-baked loaves, which could be stored for long periods and softened in soups or stews. Interestingly, these ancient food preservation techniques offer lessons even today. For example, fermenting vegetables not only preserved them, but also boosted their nutritional value, vital for fighting winter illnesses. And drying fruit or meat helped keep calories high and spoilage low. With firewood ready and food carefully stored, peasants faced the next big challenge: heating their homes efficiently. You'll soon discover how they turned simple materials and clever design into warm, if humble, shelters. But for now, remember, surviving the cold wasn't luck. It was preparation, patience, and respect for nature's rhythm. A fireplace in a peasant's hut? Forget it. So how did they stay warm? When you imagine heating, you probably picture a roaring fireplace with a chimney. But medieval peasants didn't have that luxury. Their homes were small, simple, and built with what was available, usually wood, clay, and straw. Instead of big stone fireplaces, they relied on open hearths, fires built right on the dirt floor, or a simple stone base in the center of the room. These hearths didn't have chimneys like today. Instead, smoke escaped through a hole in the roof or gaps in the walls, which meant the huts were often smoky and drafty. Still, that fire was the heart of the home, providing light, heat, and a way to cook food. But it was far from efficient. To keep the cold out, peasants used every trick they could. Walls were made thick with layers of wattle and daub, a woven lattice of wooden strips plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. This mix might sound unpleasant, but it worked surprisingly well as insulation, trapping warmth inside. Straw was another key material. It wasn't just for roofing. Bundles of straw were placed inside walls or around windows to block drafts. Wool, often from their own sheep, was used to make heavy curtains or mats to cover doors and windows, helping to seal in heat. Animal hides and thick blankets were prized possessions, brought out especially on the coldest nights. Even the floors were insulated. Peasants would cover them with rushes, straw, or sometimes dried manure, which acted as a natural insulator against the cold ground. These simple, natural materials formed layers that slowed heat loss. Despite all this, nights were still bitter. The fires could only do so much. That's why what happened after the fire died down was crucial. How did they keep warm when the hearth's glow faded? That's the most important part, and we'll uncover those secrets next. Peasants didn't wear down jackets, but they knew a thing or two about staying warm, sometimes better than we do today. Without modern fabrics or insulation, medieval peasants had to rely on natural materials and clever layering to protect themselves from the cold. Wool was king, sheep were everywhere, and their thick, oily wool kept people warm, even when damp. Woolen garments trapped heat close to the body while letting moisture escape, a key to staying warm without freezing or sweating. Peasants layered their clothes. Underneath, they wore linen shirts and trousers made from flax fibers. Linen was light but breathable, helping to manage sweat during hard work. On top, several layers of woolen tunics, cloaks, and sometimes felted wool coats were added. Each layer created pockets of warm air, insulating against the chill. They also used fur and animal skins when possible. Fur collars, hats, and mittens were prized for their warmth. Hoods were common, helping to keep heat from escaping through the head, where the body loses the most warmth. When indoors, they sometimes wrapped themselves in thick wool blankets or animal hides. Even bedding played a role. Straw-filled mattresses covered with wool blankets created cozy nests that held heat during cold nights. Peasants also used folk tricks to stay warm. For example, before heading out into the cold, they might rub their bodies with oils or fats to create a barrier against wind chill. Some believed in warming the body with hot stones wrapped in cloth, placed near the feet or hands. Clothing wasn't just about warmth, it was about survival. The right clothes meant the difference between making it through the night or falling ill. But what if even all these layers weren't enough? What if the cold still seeped in? That's when the real challenge began. How to keep warm when you finally went to bed. The answer lies in how peasants prepared their sleeping spaces, and we'll explore those secrets next. Sleeping in an icy hut? Not quite. Medieval peasants had their own secrets to stay warm at night. When the long winter nights came, the peasant's bed was more than just a place to rest. It was a carefully crafted shelter against the cold. Unlike our modern mattresses, medieval beds were often simple wooden frames, filled deep with layers of straw or dried rushes. These natural materials acted as insulation, lifting sleepers off the cold, damp floors and trapping warmth beneath them. But that was only the beginning. On top of the straw, they would often spread thick animal hides or woolen blankets, providing extra softness and warmth. Fur from sheep, goats, or wild animals was highly valued and used to line beds or make makeshift covers. These skins held body heat and created a cozy, insulated nest that could fend off the cold drafts sneaking through cracks in the walls. The depth of the bedding mattered. The thicker the layers, the better the insulation. Sometimes peasants would even stuff extra straw between their clothes and bedding for added warmth. It was all about creating microclimates, small, warm zones where heat stayed trapped close to the body. Another clever trick was how they arranged their beds inside the hut. Beds were usually placed against the warmest walls, those less exposed to wind or rain. If there was a hearth or fire, they'd position the bed nearby, but safely enough to avoid sparks or smoke. Doors and windows were often covered with heavy cloth or animal skins at night to block cold drafts. Before going to sleep, peasants also took steps to warm their bodies. They might warm stones or bricks in the fire, then wrap them in cloth and place them near their feet or under the blankets to radiate heat throughout the night. This simple hot stone method was a reliable way to fight off the cold when the fire died down. But even with all these efforts, cold nights were tough, and the challenges didn't stop at bedding. Next, we'll explore some of the folk traditions and rituals peasants used to keep their spirits and bodies warm during the harshest times. They believed in magic, but there was practical wisdom hidden in those beliefs. Medieval peasants lived in a world full of superstition and folk traditions, especially when it came to surviving harsh winters. While some of their rituals might seem strange today, many had a clear purpose: to protect against the cold and boost the spirit when survival seemed impossible. One common practice involved fire. Fire was sacred, not just for warmth and cooking, but as a symbol of life and protection. Peasants often performed simple fire rituals before nightfall, like circling the hearth with a small branch or sprinkling salt into the flames. These acts were believed to ward off evil spirits and bad luck, but also kept people focused and calm in the dark, cold hours. Protective amulets and charms were worn or hung around the home. These could be anything from a carved wooden cross to a bundle of herbs like rosemary or thyme. While these items were thought to bring good fortune or ward off illness, they also served a psychological purpose, giving people confidence and hope against the dangers of winter. Psychology played a huge role in survival. Belief in protection, community rituals, and storytelling helped peasants keep their minds strong. When fear and despair set in, the body's ability to generate heat could falter. Staying hopeful, telling tales by the fire, or singing old songs was as important as the physical measures taken against the cold. Some rituals included group activities, sharing meals, lighting candles together, or communal prayers. These helped reinforce bonds and created warmth not just from fire, but from human connection. Yet belief alone wasn't enough. Practical steps combined with this mental strength were what truly saved lives. After all, the cold didn't wait for magic. It demanded action. Next, we'll see how peasants relied on family and neighbors, sharing warmth and resources to survive the harshest nights. Because sometimes the best way to stay warm is together. You couldn't survive alone, but together even the coldest nights felt warmer. In medieval times, survival was a community effort. Winter was the harshest test of this truth. When frost and snow closed in, peasants didn't just huddle alone in their huts. They relied on family and neighbors to share warmth and resources. It was common for multiple families to gather under one roof or nearby shelters during the coldest nights, pooling their firewood, food, and body heat. Sleeping close together wasn't just about comfort, it was a matter of life and death. Sharing warmth meant fewer people suffering from hypothermia. Children were often wrapped in shared blankets or nestled between adults to stay warm. In some villages, peasants built communal shelters or heated meeting places where they could escape the worst of the cold. Neighbors helped one another in many practical ways. If someone ran low on firewood or food, others would share what they could. This system of mutual aid was crucial because one family's misfortune could quickly become the whole village's tragedy during winter. The social structure of peasant communities encouraged this support. Bonds of kinship, marriage, and friendship created networks that kept people connected. Seasonal labor was often done together, too, which built trust and cooperation that became vital when winter arrived. But what if the cold overwhelmed even these efforts? What if your home felt like an icy trap and neighbors were too far to help? Where could you turn then? The answer lies outside the home, in the unexpected places peasants found refuge from the freezing nights. We'll explore those survival strategies next. If the home didn't save them, peasants had to find shelter outside. But how was that even possible in freezing cold? Winter nights in medieval times could be brutal. Sometimes a peasant's hut wasn't enough, whether because of overcrowding, damage, or danger like fires or raids. When that happened, they turned to the wilderness, using the landscape itself to survive the cold. Temporary shelters were built quickly, using whatever was available. Snow and ice, surprisingly, became natural insulators. Peasants sometimes dug small snow pits or caves, lining them with straw or animal skins to trap body heat. These snow shelters blocked the harsh wind and kept the cold air from penetrating, creating a surprisingly warm bubble inside. Other times, simple lean-tos made from branches, bark, and straw offered protection. These huts were low and small, designed to hold in heat. Some communities built communal winter shelters, more solid than a simple lean-to, where several families could stay together, sharing warmth and safety. Survival outside the village meant also mastering secrecy and safety. Peasants had to avoid predators, both human and animal, and prevent frostbite or hypothermia while hiding. Camouflage was key. They'd use snow and earth colors in their clothing and shelters to blend into the landscape, reducing the risk of raids or wild animal attacks. Nighttime was especially dangerous. Darkness brought cold and threats, so staying alert while conserving energy was a delicate balance. They might take turns keeping watch, or use small controlled fires to keep warm without revealing their location. Despite these risks, being outside wasn't just about survival. It was a test of human resilience and creativity in the face of nature's harshest conditions. But winter's dangers didn't stop with cold and shelter. Next, we'll dive into the hidden threats, disease, hunger, and exhaustion that could strike when you least expected it. Cold didn't just freeze peasants, it brought sickness and hunger too. How did they fight back? Winter was a deadly season for medieval peasants, not only because of the biting cold, but also because of the diseases it brought. When bodies grew weak from lack of food and constant chill, illnesses spread quickly. Coughs turned into pneumonia, colds became fevers, and wounds that wouldn't heal could lead to infection and death. Common winter illnesses included respiratory infections like bronchitis and pneumonia, which were especially dangerous without modern medicine. Symptoms like persistent coughing, high fever, and difficulty breathing often meant a slow, painful decline. To fight these, peasants relied on folk remedies, herbal teas made from plants like thyme, sage, or elderberry, believed to ease symptoms and boost strength. Digestive troubles were also common in winter. Without fresh vegetables and fruits, vitamin deficiencies weakened immune systems. Peasants understood the importance of certain preserved foods. Fermented vegetables like sauerkraut, rich in vitamin C, helped prevent scurvy and kept bodies stronger through the harsh months. Hunger was a constant threat. Food stores ran low, and poor nutrition made people more vulnerable to cold and disease. This meant every meal mattered. They ate soups and stews that stretched limited ingredients while providing warmth and calories. The struggle against cold was a battle on many fronts. Staying warm was vital, but so was staying healthy and nourished. The cold was the enemy that triggered a cascade of dangers, from frostbite to sickness, that could wipe out a family or whole village. Looking back, it's clear why medieval peasants feared winter more than any enemy or famine. The cold was relentless, invisible, and unforgiving. But despite all these threats, they survived. How? By blending practical wisdom, community support, and traditions that balanced body and spirit. In our final section, we'll pull it all together and reveal the lasting lessons from their struggle against the coldest nights of the year. What can we learn from medieval peasants today, even with heating and electricity at our fingertips? It's easy to forget how challenging winter survival once was. But the struggles of medieval peasants hold timeless lessons, especially in a world where climate change and energy costs make us rethink how we live and use resources. First, their approach to insulation and shelter is surprisingly relevant. Thick walls made from natural materials, layering clothing, and using textiles to block drafts. These old-school methods remind us to pay attention to our home's warmth in simple, sustainable ways. Modern insulation is great, but sealing gaps and adding layers like heavy curtains or draft stoppers can save energy and money. Next is food. Medieval preservation methods, fermenting, drying, and salting, aren't just history. They're a smart way to reduce waste, store seasonal produce, and keep nutritious food ready through winter. Eating nutrient-rich, well-preserved foods helps maintain energy and immunity during colder months. Perhaps most important is their mindset. Peasants understood the power of community, hope, and mental strength. When nights were darkest and coldest, shared stories, rituals, and helping each other kept spirits alive. Today, that reminds us to nurture social bonds and support networks, especially in tough times. Their respect for natural rhythms and careful use of resources teaches us to live with more awareness. Instead of taking warmth, food, and comfort for granted, we can learn to appreciate and conserve what we have. So next time the heater clicks on or you pull on a wool sweater, think of those who survived the cold without modern comforts. Their resilience and wisdom invite us to reflect. How can we live more sustainably and gratefully in the world we share? Winter may be easier now, but its lessons remain just as vital.